courtroom buzzed with quiet murmurs, the kind of uneasy chatter that precedes a public spectacle. The air was heavy, not just with the weight of the case, but with the collective tension of a room filled with people eager to witness a downfall. At the defense table sat Daniel Carter, a small business owner whose dream of running a family-owned construction company was now hanging by a thread. His once confident posture was slumped, his hands fidgeting nervously in his lap. To him, this wasn't just a case. It was his livelihood, his family's future, and his integrity on trial. Across from him, William Greaves, a towering figure in the world of corporate real estate, exuded calm authority. Greaves was suing Daniel for $1 million, accusing him of fraud and negligence on a major construction project. With his expensive suit and a team of seasoned attorneys, Greaves was the embodiment of power. The plaintiff's lead attorney stood poised at the podium, his voice dripping with confidence as he addressed the jury. "Ladies and gentlemen, the evidence is clear. Mr. Carter's actions have not only cost my client millions in damages, but have also jeopardized the safety of an entire community. This is negligence of the highest order." Daniel glanced at his own attorney, Lisa Monroe. She was competent, yes, but visibly overwhelmed. The odds were stacked against them, and everyone in the room knew it. Then, the judge's gavel slammed, silencing the room. "We will now hear the final arguments from the plaintiff's counsel." Daniel swallowed hard. It felt like the beginning of the end. Daniel Carter had always been a man of integrity. Raised in a modest working-class neighborhood, he had inherited Carter Construction from his father, who had built the company with his bare hands and an unwavering commitment to quality. Over the years, Daniel had upheld that legacy, earning a reputation for honest work and a dedication to building homes that families could trust. When the opportunity came to work with Greaves Enterprises, Daniel saw it as a milestone, a chance to elevate his small family-run business to a new level. Greaves Enterprises, a corporate real estate giant, was developing a luxury condominium complex, and Carter Construction was awarded the contract to lead the project. For Daniel, this wasn't just another job. It was the culmination of years of hard work, a chance to secure his company's future. First, everything went smoothly. The project was on schedule and the inspections had passed without issue. But things took a dark turn halfway through. Greaves's team began sending abrupt emails, questioning minor details that had previously been approved. Soon after, they began alleging major safety violations: cracked beams, substandard materials, and structural flaws. Daniel was blindsided. Despite his meticulous records and careful adherence to regulations, the accusations snowballed. Greaves claimed that Daniel had cut corners to save money, putting future residents at risk. Then came the lawsuit, a staggering $1 million in damages. The lawsuit hit Daniel like a freight train. His company's finances were already stretched thin, and legal fees began piling up. What made the situation worse was the relentless media coverage. Local news outlets picked up the story, portraying Carter Construction as a careless company, endangering lives. Daniel watched in dismay as his once solid reputation crumbled. Clients began pulling contracts, and his employees started worrying about their jobs. Privately, Daniel couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't adding up. He knew his work was sound and every inspection had cleared the site. Why then was Greaves so adamant about tearing him down? But in court, feelings didn't matter, evidence did. And Greaves had plenty of it. Doctored photos, manipulated reports, and even testimony from a subcontractor who claimed Daniel had instructed him to use inferior materials. With every piece of evidence presented, the scales tipped further against Daniel. By the time the trial began, Daniel's business, reputation, and personal life were on the brink of collapse. The courtroom was stifling, its air heavy with tension and the quiet hum of whispers from the gallery. Daniel Carter sat at the defendant's table, his shoulders slumped but his hands tightly clasped together, as though trying to hold on to what little resolve he had left. Across from him, the plaintiff's attorney, Richard Porter, stood with the confidence of a man accustomed to winning. His tailored suit, sharp features, and calculated demeanor radiated authority. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, Porter began, pacing deliberately in front of the jurors, what we have here is a textbook case of negligence. Gross negligence. My client, Graves Enterprises, trusted Carter Construction to deliver a safe, high-quality building. Instead, they were left with a ticking time bomb, flawed beams, shoddy materials, and reckless oversight. Mr. Carter didn't just fail his contract, he endangered lives. He paused for effect, his eyes scanning the jurors, who sat stone-faced. Then, with a flick of his wrist, he gestured toward a stack of documents on his table. The evidence doesn't lie. Independent inspectors flagged these defects. Photographs show the cracks. Credible witnesses, will testify to Carter's shortcuts. The facts are irrefutable. Daniel's attorney, Susan McBride, rose to object. Your Honor, the plaintiff's counsel is making assumptions that have not yet been proven. The judge, a stern woman in her 60s, nodded. Sustained. Mr. Porter, stick to the evidence. Porter smirked, unfazed. Of course, Your Honor. The evidence will speak for itself. As the plaintiff's case unfolded, it became clear that Porter had built an airtight narrative. Witness after witness took the stand. An inspector claiming he'd found substandard materials. A subcontractor alleging Daniel had pressured him to cut corners. Even a former employee accusing him of ignoring red flags. Each testimony felt like another nail in the coffin. Daniel sat silently, his jaw clenched. He wanted to shout, to protest, to demand someone look deeper, but in this room his voice felt small, overshadowed by the mountain of evidence stacked against him. When Susan cross-examined the subcontractor, she aimed to poke holes in his credibility. Mr. Ellis, isn't it true that you were fired from Carter Construction for missing deadlines? Ellis shifted uncomfortably. That's irrelevant. I'm here to talk about the defects. Answer the question, Susan pressed. Yes, Ellis admitted reluctantly. But it doesn't change what I saw. All right. Susan turned to the jury, her voice steady but firm. Ladies and gentlemen, consider the source. A disgruntled former employee with a grudge. How much weight can we truly give his claims? Still, for every point Susan scored, Porter delivered 2. He painted Daniel as a man desperate to save costs at any price, even if it meant compromising safety. The jury watched intently, their faces betraying little, but the tide seemed to favor the plaintiff. As the day wore on, Susan called Daniel to the stand. His voice trembled as he recounted his side of the story. I've built my company on trust. My father taught me that a handshake is as good as a contract. I would never endanger lives or cut corners. I've followed every regulation, used the best materials, and passed every inspection up until now. Porter pounced the moment he had a chance. So, Mr. Carter, are you suggesting that all the evidence against you, these photos, these inspections, these witnesses, is fabricated? Daniel hesitated. I'm saying it doesn't add up. I don't know how, but, Porter cut him off. You don't know. That's not very reassuring for a man whose decisions could have put lives at risk, is it? Daniel's silence hung in the air, heavy and damning. By the afternoon, the trial seemed all but over. The gallery murmured, sensing the inevitability of Daniel's loss. Even Susan, her voice tight with frustration, seemed to falter as she tried to rebut the overwhelming evidence. The tension reached its peak when Porter presented his final piece of evidence. A series of inspection reports, stamped with official seals, showing critical structural flaws that had allegedly been overlooked by Carter Construction. Your Honor, Porter said, his voice triumphant, this proves beyond a shadow of a doubt that the defendant failed in his duty. We rest our case. Daniel's heart sank. His throat felt dry, his palms clammy. He glanced at Susan, who offered a weak, forced smile of reassurance, but even she seemed to know the odds were stacked against them. Just as the judge prepared to call for closing arguments, a creak echoed through the courtroom. Everyone turned toward the doors as they swung open. A tall man in a dark suit strode in, his expression calm but purposeful. His presence was magnetic, and the room fell silent. Daniel's brow furrowed in confusion. Who was this man? And why did the mere sight of him make Porter's confident smirk falter for the first time that day? The heavy wooden doors of the courtroom creaked open, the sounds slicing through the tense silence like a knife. Heads turned in unison, jurors craning their necks, spectators whispering in curiosity. The judge frowned, peering over her glasses at the unexpected intrusion. Through the doors walked a man, tall, sharply dressed in a tailored dark suit that seemed to absorb the fluorescent courtroom lighting. His stride was calm but deliberate, his presence commanding attention. His salt and pepper hair was neatly combed, his square jaw set with quiet determination. He carried a leather briefcase, worn but polished, and his piercing gaze swept the room as though he were already in control of it. For a moment there was nothing but stunned silence. Even Richard Porter, the plaintiff's unflappable attorney, paused mid-smirk, his confidence briefly shaken. He glanced uneasily at his client, whose face was now a shade paler. The stranger reached the center aisle, his polished shoes clicking softly against the tiled floor, and stopped. He turned toward the bench, inclining his head respectfully to the judge. "Your Honor," he said, his voice low and smooth, yet carrying a weight that demanded attention. "I apologize for my late arrival. I request permission to address the court as an amicus curiae." "A friend of the court?" the judge asked, her tone sharp with skepticism. "Who are you, and why should I grant this request at this stage in the proceedings?" The man stepped forward, placing his briefcase on the defendant's table beside a stunned Daniel Carter and his attorney, Susan McBride. He opened it with precise movements, revealing a stack of neatly organized files. Turning back to the judge, he pulled out a document and held it up. "My name is Victor Hayes, Your Honor," he announced, his voice steady. "I am a forensic auditor and legal consultant specializing in corporate fraud. What I have here," he tapped the document in his hand, "is evidence that directly contradicts the claims made by the plaintiff and their counsel. I believe it will fundamentally alter the trajectory of this case." Gasps rippled through the gallery, and the murmurs grew louder. The judge's gavel slammed against her desk. "Order," she barked, silencing the room, her skeptical gaze fixed on Hayes. "And why should this court entertain evidence presented at the 11th hour? You're aware this case is already in its final stages." "I am, Your Honor," Hayes replied evenly. "But the integrity of this court, and the principle of justice, demand that the truth be heard, no matter the timing." Porter, now visibly uneasy, stood abruptly. "Your Honor, this is highly irregular. This man isn't part of the defense team, and we have no idea what he intends to present. Allowing this would undermine the process." "Undermine the process, Mr. Porter," Hayes interrupted, his tone sharp, "or expose the truth." The room buzzed again with whispers, and Porter's jaw tightened. He turned to his client, whose hands fidgeted nervously on the table. Susan McBride, though still stunned, quickly seized the moment. "Your Honor, I respectfully request that Mr. Hayes be allowed to present his findings. If what he claims is true, it would be a miscarriage of justice not to hear it." The judge leaned back in her chair, studying Hayes. The room held its collective breath. Finally, she nodded. "Proceed, Mr. Hayes. But I warn you, this court has no tolerance for theatrics or baseless accusations. Your evidence had better be substantial." Hayes nodded curtly, stepping back to the defendant's table. He opened his briefcase again and extracted a thick folder of documents, handing one to the bailiff to distribute to the judge and opposing counsel. As the papers changed hands, Hayes looked directly at Daniel Carter, who stared at him in bewilderment. With a small, reassuring smile, Hayes murmured, "Trust me, this isn't over." The courtroom buzzed again, the tide shifting palpably. All eyes were now on Hayes, the man who had entered as a mystery but was quickly becoming the linchpin in a case that had seemed all but lost. Victor Hayes strode confidently to the center of the courtroom, his every move deliberate. He held up a single document, its crisp edges reflecting the harsh courtroom light. "What I have here," he began, his voice firm and steady, "is irrefutable proof that the plaintiff's claims are based on fraudulent evidence and deceptive practices." The room fell silent, every eye locked on him. Even Richard Porter, who had exuded confidence throughout the trial, looked visibly shaken. Hayes continued, handing copies of the document to the judge, the bailiff, and opposing counsel. "This is a forensic audit of the plaintiff's financial records, conducted independently over the past 3 weeks. It reveals a systematic pattern of falsified invoices and manipulated accounting entries, designed specifically to create the illusion that my client, Mr. Carter, owes them $1 million. The judge adjusted her glasses and scanned the document, her brow furrowing deeper with every line. She glanced up. "Mr. Hayes, can you elaborate on this audit? What exactly are we looking at here?" "Of course, Your Honor." Hayes gestured to the document. "You'll see that several invoices submitted as evidence by the plaintiff do not match the original records filed with their own accounting software. Using metadata analysis, we uncovered timestamps showing these invoices were altered after the lawsuit was initiated. The amounts were inflated, and fictitious charges were added to create the claim against Mr. Carter." Gasps rippled through the gallery. The judge leaned forward, her expression sharp. "Are you saying the plaintiff falsified evidence submitted to this court?" "Precisely, Your Honor," Hayes replied. "Furthermore, I have email correspondence between the plaintiff, Mr. Eric Holden, and his legal team. These emails reveal explicit instructions to fabricate evidence in order to secure a favorable judgment." At this, Porter shot to his feet, his face flushed. "Objection! This is hearsay. There's no proof these emails are authentic." Hayes didn't flinch. "If Mr. Porter would like to examine the original files, I have copies verified by a third-party cybersecurity firm." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. "And if necessary, I'm prepared to call an expert witness to testify to their authenticity." The courtroom erupted into whispers, chaos threatening to spill over. The judge banged her gavel. "Order in the court!" Turning to the plaintiff, the judge's gaze was piercing. "Mr. Holden, do you have a response to these allegations?" Holden's face was pale, his hands trembling. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. Porter whispered furiously in his ear, but it was clear the tide had turned. The unshakable foundation of their case had crumbled under the weight of Victor Hayes's evidence. The judge's gavel struck sharply. "Given the overwhelming evidence of fraud presented by Mr. Hayes, this court has no choice but to dismiss the plaintiff's claims against Mr. Carter. Furthermore, I am referring this matter to the District Attorney's Office for investigation into potential criminal misconduct by the plaintiff and his legal team." A wave of relief washed over Carter as he slumped into his chair, tears streaming down his face. His attorney clasped his shoulder, whispering, "It's over. You're free." Across the aisle, Eric Holden sat motionless, his once arrogant demeanor replaced by sheer panic. Porter was frantically gathering papers, already preparing his defense for what lay ahead. Justice had not only been served, it had exposed corruption for all to see. Victor Hayes walked over to Carter, extending a hand. "I told you, truth has a way of finding its voice." Carter stood, shaking Hayes's hand with a gratitude he couldn't put into words. As the courtroom emptied, Carter turned back for one last glance. This place had nearly broken him, but it also became the stage for his redemption. Sometimes justice isn't swift or easy, but when it arrives, it reminds us all, the fight for what's right is always worth it.